So the first thing to dive into is we want to first look at the owner marketing metrics. So that would be in most cases you as the doctor, possibly you are have equity in a practice as like a CA or an office manager. But in a lot of cases, that will be the doctor. So let's take a look at some owner marketing metrics. These are really the input metrics. Okay, so we first have to define input and output. And so when in sales and marketing, the inputs are always what we have full control over. Okay, so some examples on the screen are number of messages sent. So number of messages sent on social media to prospects on a daily basis. We can control the input. We can control how many messages we send every single day. The second is number of calls made. Number of calls made on a daily basis. We can also control that. We can control how much we put in, and the more we put in, we will get a more linear kind of growth pattern. So if we make 100 calls in a day, we might see X results. If we make 200 calls in a day, we could possibly see 2X because we've essentially doubled our volume, right? So we've doubled our input with the hopes of seeing that same kind of growth on the output side. The next is number of positive responses. And so if we're controlling the number of messages sent, then what we can look at is we want to look at like a quality indicator. So we want to balance quantity and quality metrics. And so the quantity is number of messages sent. The quality is, okay, we sent 500 messages, but how many of those people actually responded back expressing a positive interest in the message that you just sent? That's very important because you could send thousands of messages that are really not too good, and then you don't get any good response, and you're just like, well, messaging doesn't work. And it wasn't that the messaging doesn't work. It was maybe the message was incorrect for the user or something didn't resonate. So we want to be able to look at, okay, hey, we've sent this many messages. How many people responded positively? That's our positive response rate. Okay. The same is true for calls. We could look at number of calls per appointment. So the number of calls per appointment would be how many calls on average need to be made in order to generate a single new patient appointment, a confirmed new patient appointment. Somebody agrees to come in for a consultation. That would be considered an appointment. And so did it take us 10 calls to get an appointment? Did it take us 100 calls to get an appointment? Did it take us 25, right? We want to know that because, again, we can then kind of improve those metrics. Like if we're finding that's taking, we make 100 calls and we're only able to get one appointment, we may want to listen to the calls that are being made to make sure we're using the right language to ultimately improve that process, okay? Number of messages per appointment, same idea there, right? So, hey, we're for every 100 messages sent, we're setting 5 appointments. Maybe that's great. If we're sending 100 messages and getting maybe 1 appointment, that could be something to work on, you know? So we, again, it's a quality versus quantity input, making sure that we're getting enough numbers to have a good sample size, but also making sure that what we're saying in the messaging is effective to produce the outcome. And then the last is ad spend. So the amount of money spent on ads. The ad spend is an input too, right? We can spend more on ads, likely get a higher return, right? If we spend $2,000 in a month, we might get X. If we spend 4,000, we could possibly get 2X because we've doubled our input, you know? Now a system becomes really, really effective when we do a mix of all of this stuff. When we send messages, when we make calls, when we run ad spend, you typically don't want to rely on one pole in the water. You want to have a lot of poles in the water because at the end of the day, you want to be a wise fisherman. And, you know, if you only have one pole in the water, you might go hungry versus if you have 12, you're probably going to catch a fish every day, you know? So those are all inputs we want to first consider when we're looking at owner marketing metrics. Now, as we continue, we have always, of course, want to look at outputs as well. Now, what I will say is we've coached a lot of different docs in this space. So an online acquisition of new patients, that's what we're known for. And what I will say is that I think that more people put a massive emphasis on output metrics that we're going to cover right now, but they don't put nearly as much as much attention on the input metrics, the things that they can control. Again, number of calls, number of messages, their ad spend. Okay, so as we get into these outputs here, especially if you're newer in practice, you really, really want to focus on the inputs because a lot of times the outputs are like they're lagging indicators. Okay, they don't necessarily, they're a result of an activity. They're not the activity itself. Okay, so just kind of a side note on that. So owner marketing metrics in terms of outputs, good ones to track: lead, number of engaged leads. You know, someone who expresses interest in the thing in which you sell, typically an entry offer to come in for a consultation. A lead, someone who's, okay, you got a first name, last name, phone number, and email. That's a basic lead there. We do track ROAS. ROAS is the term. ROAS, which stands for return on ad spent. That's like, okay, hey, for every dollar I spent, I'm getting $4 back. Okay, sweet. I'm getting 4-to-1 return on ad spend. That's awesome. We look at CAC, client acquisition cost. If you want to frame it for chiropractic, it would be PAC, patient acquisition cost. That's really the kind of end of the road ultimate outcome metric is your client acquisition cost, otherwise known as CAC, C-A-C. That is a great metric to track. The CAC is essentially all investment dollars and cents added up. So let's say you spend $100 on ads, and maybe it costs you in labor another $20 to set that up. Your hard cost all in is 120 to get somebody in the door to convert. Now 120 would be low in chiropractic, but usually we're seeing somewhere between a general basis, anywhere between 150 upwards to 300 per acquisition, I would say, for a new patient. So you just want to make sure that you're tracking how much it's costing you all in, from labor, commissions, ad spend, overhead, to ultimately get a client to sign on, and that becomes your client acquisition cost. Okay. Then we track number of leads. So number of leads over a period of time. So if we get 30 leads in a month, that would be a pretty solid run rate. 30 to 50 leads is usually where you need to sit to grow a practice. At least probably to 40 to 50,000 bucks a month. Once you start going from 50 to 100,000 bucks a month, you're probably going to need to double that, right? Number of schedules. So we want to look at the number of people who schedule an appointment over a period of time. So again, if we get 50 leads and we know at the end of the day that 20 of them scheduled appointments, we can do that math, 40% lead to schedule rate. And then that is the last metric, which is lead to schedule percentage, which is the percentage of leads who end up scheduling an appointment. So in that example, hey, if we get 50 leads, 20 of them schedule, that'd be a 40% lead to schedule rate. Those are some output metrics that are good to track. Other ones you can track, which could be helpful in the clinic, are like revenue per show. So you basically total up all of the revenue collected by the new patients and the conversions, and then you divide that by the number of people who entered the business. That gives you a good gauge on how marketing and sales are working together as far as a handshake. That would be revenue per show. So the amount of money made in the clinic every time a patient walks in the door. Now we're going to transition here a little bit into sales metrics. So sales and marketing, obviously both of those have inputs and outputs. And so what we want to do now is review some sales input metrics. Sales input metrics, I would say, are not even probably are the most overlooked input metrics I see inside of practices, most notably cash practices as well. So there's some inputs as far as sales metrics. Number of days role played. So number of days that we spent practicing the phone scripts, the sales scripts, and the renewal scripts. We want to track our tone, our pacing, our verbiage. We want to listen to the calls, and we want to be able to get better across time. So we want to be able to role play the tough conversations when it comes to the phone call of new patients, the report of findings, the day one consultation. All of that needs to be role played. And within that, we're going to be tracking, again, tone, pacing, verbiage, all that kind of stuff there. The next is number of offers recorded, which means that if you do a report of finding, let's say in a given week you do 10 reports of findings, 10 ROFs, ideally you want to record all of those presentations, not necessarily in a video, but just having like a mic underneath your shirt. And then that way you can record the conversation to be diagnosed for accuracy and improvements as you go into the next report of findings in the future, which leads to then script adherence. So if we're recording our calls, we can then give ourselves a script adherence percentage, which is a percentage of the time we are adhering to the phone and sales script. We don't want to get too off in the weeds or off in Jupiter. We want to make sure that our adherence to the script is at a pretty high percentage. Okay. Some other inputs as far as sales is how well are we prepping for our report of findings? How well do we truly know the problems of the patient when they walk in, and how well are we repeating those problems to them? How is our rapport building and question asking? Did we identify and eliminate any possible objections during our day one discovery period? What objections are we missing that we can identify with an improvement in our discovery? Maybe we're getting hit with an objection that was kind of unforeseen. What are the objections that we're missing? Let's jot those down, and then we can identify an improvement to really combat those in the discovery phase. So if you're getting hit a lot with a decision maker objection, very common inside of a service-based facility, you probably want to bake that into a day one discussion to make sure that you're going to minimize all potential friction when it comes to that objection downstream. Okay. And then the last would be how well are we adding value, raising perceived value of the program. So how well are we demonstrating the report of findings? How are we engaging the prospect? How are we just keeping that value stream in terms of deliverables high? We ultimately don't want to just have our report of findings be too long-winded. We don't want it to be just like a one you sitting across the table from somebody, just talk, talk, talk. We want to engage. We want to add value. We want to ask questions that keep them in the game. So that's a good thing to look at during your sales process as well. So those are owner sales metrics in terms of inputs. Now let's look at some outputs as far as sales. These ones are pretty straightforward. Number of shows, which is the number of new people who entered the clinic over a given period of time. The schedule to show rate, percentage of people that scheduled an appointment that actually showed up for their appointment. Number of offers made, so the number of prospects who are qualified and are presented an offer. So if we get 10 people that walk in and 8 of them are a fit for the report of findings, that would mean that, hey, we made 8 offers that day. Number of signups, that number of people who said yes to the high ticket offer. Sign up percentage, which is the percentage of people that said yes. If we pitch 8 and 4 say yes, 50% conversion. Number of renewal opportunities. So patients that are transitioning from their initial, 2, 3, maybe 4-month care into the monthly maintenance. We want to track the number of renewal opportunities on the calendar every week, and then number of patients that did in fact convert on the renewal. Then we want to know the renewal sign up percentage, the percentage of people that said yes to the renewal as well. So those are good metrics to track as far as outputs. Just again, high level metrics there. It would just be, especially when it comes to the inputs. I think that that's one thing that if you take anything from this training, definitely take the inputs away, especially in the sales side, just because I feel like a lot of people are not doing the role play in the clinic. They're not practicing the day one phone call. They're not practicing the day one greeting and how they greet the patient. They're not practicing the transition, maybe from like a CA to the doctor. That's all input stuff that can directly impact how much you're able to convert inside your practice. So at the end of the week, you have a bunch of metrics to look at, and these are just a few. I wanted to get the kind of the ball moving for you guys here. Obviously, there's more metrics outside of that so you can track. But then what's important is for you guys to do a weekly business review. And really what the weekly business review is a 30-minute weekly meeting to review all the sales, marketing, and other business metrics. We try to have this as a non-negotiable. Um, in our business, we've gone back and forth. We do this currently on Mondays. We review the previous week, and we kind of set our targets for the current week. We used to do the review on Friday, but what we found with Friday was that at times all the metrics were not fully updated because we still had half a day because we usually do them around noon. So that was one of the challenges. And then the other challenge was that we would set a game plan for the upcoming week. And then that game plan would not always be completely fresh in everybody's head as we came around to the following week. So we found that doing it on Monday, all the metrics are in for the last week. And then it's a good day to just kind of set the stage for what's to come in the current week. So we do our weekly business review for about 30 minutes on Mondays. Our main objective is to identify the main bottleneck inside of our business. Typically, there's only one. If you think there's more than one bottleneck in your business, while that may be the case, you typically want to identify the one that's going to have the most upside if you fix it, meaning that if you fix this bottleneck out of all of them, this would have the biggest movement in my business. What is that bottleneck? How can I identify it, right? Then what we want to do is when we have the main bottleneck, we want to identify 1 to 3 main activities to improve the bottleneck. And then we want to take action, check on progress, week over week over week, work check, work check, work check. So you basically are working, developing a plan, then basically executing, then checking the work. Okay, did we hit our numbers? Where did we fall short? Why did we fall short? What can we do to improve it next time? So that's essentially what we do start to finish on the weekly business review. We do those again every week on Monday for about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on what we need to talk about that day. It's a good chance to review the previous week and then also set the stage for the current week and kind of get everybody's wheels spinning again inside the business. So I hope that's been helpful. Those are just some general business metrics that you guys can track if you're not already. If you have other metrics too, by all means, use them, incorporate them. If you're not using some of these and you find them valuable, definitely implement those in your practice. I would say the biggest one that I think is most important comes down to the CAC, which is the cost it takes to get a client in the door, or excuse me, the cost it takes to get somebody to sign up for your program, customer acquisition cost. That's an important one that I think a lot of people are not tracking all the way downstream. And ideally, kind of a little bit of a freebie here is you essentially, in a perfect world, you want your CAC to be 3 times less than your lifetime value. So if your patient lifetime value is $1,500, $1,500, you want your customer acquisition cost of that patient to be 500, which is 1/3 of the 1,500. So hopefully that's helpful. If you guys are checking this on replay, give us a replay, show us some love. We're going to be doing these trainings once a week on Fridays. And then we'll be mostly talking about marketing, sales stuff, but we'll mix in some other ideas in terms of like retention and basically maybe some team ideas as well. If you guys have topics you want us to go into, you can feel free to comment on this live as well. And we're happy to dig through some of those and see if there's some commonalities and some trainings that we can put together that would be beneficial for you guys. So hopefully that's helpful. We'll see you guys in the next training. Again, if you're watching this on replay, give us a hashtag replay. It helps us. We're doing this stuff for free in the group with the ultimate intent to help you guys just take some golden nuggets, grow your practice. And then you might wonder what's in it for us. Well, we're hoping that if you guys can take these ideas, grow your practice, get value from this for free, then possibly you'll consider us in terms of us running your ads, in terms of just getting more people in the door, coaching your team on sales, then ultimately helping you get to 100 grand or more per month. That's usually our magic star. So hopefully it's been valuable. We'll see you guys in the next training. Any questions or comments, let us know in the comments section. We're happy to address. Otherwise, hope you guys have a great weekend. Cheers.